Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Thursday and welcome to this week's hand fasting video. Today we're talking about feasting. So call it a feast or call it a reception. It seems regardless of our faith or our culture, it is traditional, worldwide, religion-wide, to have a party after the wedding ceremony. This is by far the most expensive part of the hand fasting in all probability, so definitely double check on price tags on everything before making firm commitments with vendors. So with that in mind, let's discuss. So the decor. Once you've settled on where the feast is going to be held, the question becomes, what are you allowed to do for decor? And of course that is going to vary from venue to venue. Now it's handy, if it is financially possible for you, to choose a venue that reflects the mood and the tone of your hand fasting. It's much easier to weave in decorative personal details to create a more seamless effect. Obviously this isn't always possible. We come up against that tedious matter of money all the time. But if it is possible, that saves you a lot of time and trouble, and you won't have to invest as much money into the decor to create the effect that you want. So, the practicalities. How much space are you working with? And do you have choices about the layout of tables and chairs? Because some venues, they have their way of doing things, and that's just the way that it is. And some venues even have divisions between the areas. They'll have a designated lobby. The restrooms are off to one side. You have a kitchen area tucked away in the back. There's a separate space where you have the dining room set up, and others even have, a ballroom that is specifically set up for the dancing. And then there are other venues that just kind of have it all in one big area. And so you may need to create divisions, usually with the placement of tables and chairs, to try to make it more functional and to improve the overall flow. Make sure that your walkways aren't too narrow so that people can roam around comfortably. Now, as far as the tables themselves go, make proper note of their dimensions. It's going to be incredibly annoying if you're trying to fit round tablecloths onto rectangle tables because you didn't make a specific note of the fact that they were rectangle instead of round, or you were out shopping for tablecloths and you picked up the round ones without thinking about the shape of your table. And also, if it comes down to an issue of size, it's better to get tablecloths that are just a touch too big than too small. If they're too small, it just looks like poor planning. But if it's too big, well, then it starts to look luxurious and elegant. You can sell that a lot easier than if things are too small. Now, the centerpieces should just dress the table up without taking up too much room or with making conversation impossible. No one wants to be able to lean around or up for, this business, around the floral arrangements just so they can have a conversation with someone. If you are making your own centerpieces, you will find that it will be easier and faster to make them all look the same. You can plan out exactly how much material you need. You can create an assembly line, and that also makes it a lot easier to recruit assistants if people have an exact idea of what you're actually doing. However, if you're like me and you want to have a looser, more informal, more bohemian effect, then different centerpieces become a virtue. As long as you have your range of flowers and your range of colors that you're using, and this approach does expand your options. But since each centerpiece will be different, that means you have to get a touch more creative. That makes it harder for other people to just kind of jump in and create with you. And of course, it takes more time, and that can take a toll on your sanity as well as your schedule. So be mindful of that and make an informed choice about what's actually going to work best for you. So let's talk food and drink. It basically boils down to three basic options: do it yourself, have it catered, or have a potluck. Now, each of these approaches have their pros and cons, and each is going to involve a serious expense. In the case of the potluck, a little bit less so, but still, you are going to be forking out some pretty decent money. And another hurdle to think about when you're considering food and drink options is just how insane people have become about their dietary requirements, whether they are real or imagined. And let's be honest, a lot of people's things that they have to eat, it is very much up here and not so much a matter of their physiology. But that is a different conversation. But you are going to have to be practical. You have to draw the line somewhere about what you can and cannot accommodate. And hopefully your guests are actually reasonable people and they are disinclined to pitch a conniption fit if the menu doesn't revolve around their preferences. So let's talk about doing it yourself. If you, likely along with your family, decide to do all the cooking, obviously this will need to be done ahead of time. You will need to have a team. You can probably prevail upon your older female relatives. That's oftentimes the best bet. You will need everyone to come together to ensure that all the food gets to the venue in plenty of time to be rewarmed. Likely there will be a plethora of crock-pot dishes, so make sure that there's going to be enough electrical outfits that are conveniently situated to where you're setting up the food. I would suggest keeping the menu simple and easy to prepare. Believe me, you will thank me for that advice come the day. And you'll probably want to set out the food in more of a buffet style, and I would suggest consulting a chart about ideal buffet layouts. It'll be easier to follow a plan. It cuts down on setup time on the day itself. Now, the second possibility is catering. Now, obviously, and this is way more convenient than what we just talked about, but you will find yourself paying for that convenience. And that being said, not all catering services are created equal. And just because a catering service is charging a little bit less doesn't mean you're getting good value for your money. Some of these places make food that is so dreadful, you really wonder why they got into the profession at all, because clearly they hate both food and people, and probably weddings to boot. So do a taste test before signing a contract. And if they don't want to accommodate you, I would say you don't need to be working with those people. Now, some caterers will actually do the setup for you for a buffet-style dinner. Others actually provide waiting staff for a more formal affair. But again, your bank account will be feeling the effects of that expense. So if you can afford the option, wonderful. It takes a huge pressure and a huge chore off of your plate. But if you can't, do not stretch your finances too thin on this. There are other options to consider. Now, your third option is to throw a potluck. Now, this is the most informal option, and you'll want to be mindful of how your relatives, your friends, and the general community actually view potluck suppers. When I was growing up, my female relatives in particular detested them because they felt like people shouldn't be using their guests as vendors. And keep in mind that the people who were in our social circle who threw the potlucks, they only threw potlucks. They never just invited people over to their houses for dinner. They never just met up with someone at a restaurant. And there were other underlying relationship issues within those circles. So take my relatives' opinions with a pinch of salt, but just be aware that they may not necessarily be the only people in the world who have that particular opinion. Now, if you're not facing any kind of disapproval about having a potluck, it is a good option for your reception, provided you are being reasonable. Now, as the host, you should provide the main course. That way you're only imposing on your guests to bring side dishes. And I would suggest not trying to dictate to people what dishes they bring. It spoils the spirit of generosity that a potluck represents, and this has a way of breeding resentment. That's not a good way to go about your wedding. And I actually remember, this was about 15 years ago now, there was an occasion, there was a potluck held by a member of the congregation I was part of at the time, and they did try to tell people what to bring and how much of it, and honest, and I think they even tried to tell people how to cook it. Suddenly, for some reason, people found themselves unable to attend. And then they started avoiding conversation with that person. And that person, in turn, started griping about how mean everyone was for not falling in line. And what else could you expect from those people? Best to avoid creating that kind of situation. So that's just a few things for you to bear in mind as you're doing the food and drink planning. Now for the highlight of the reception. The cake. Now, this could be cake or pie or brownies. I've even seen people use donuts. People can get very creative about their dessert options. But just as the bride's dress is the focal point for the ceremony, at the feast, the cake takes center stage. It will also be the focus of picture taking, and it'll have a very prominent place in your wedding album. You want it to look good, so if you are going to indulge in just one thing, this is definitely the place to do it. Now, I admit I did make and decorate my own hand-fasting cake. It tasted fantastic. It turned out very, very beautiful. I'm absolutely proud of it. But I was a bundle of nerves the week before my hand-fasting, and I was consumed with worry that I wouldn't be able to pull it off, or people wouldn't like it, or there would be some kind of unmitigated disaster. So if you can avoid that kind of stress, don't make your own cake. But if you do choose to make it yourself, and my warnings of insanity have not deterred you, Be sensible, plan a design that is well within your skill set, and try to ensure that you have zero other last minute details to attend to. You're not going to have the time, you won't have the energy, and I guarantee you will not be in the mood to deal with anything. You will be consumed by that. So, warnings aside, let's go on. The cake, or whatever you choose for the main dessert, that's one area in which I think only minimal consideration should be given to the preferences of others. Now, granted, it is sensible to choose flavors that have a pretty broad appeal, but the look of the cake, it should reflect the tone of the wedding and the taste of you and your intended. Unless all of your relatives are diabetic, in which case you might want to have a secondary backup option for the cake. The cake is still the right place for you to go full steam ahead with your favorite sweet flavors. People don't like it, you know what, they didn't pay for the wedding, so maybe they don't get a vote. Now, when you sit down with your baker, it's a good idea to have pictures to show them and be able to leave those pictures with them. It gives the baker a sense of how you want things to look and the degree of formality or informality that you're really looking for. Also, be sure to have swatches of your wedding colors that you can leave with them so the baker can take that into account as they make and choosing colors and blending things and everything else. Now, when it comes to your inspiration pictures, do keep in mind that it is not a realistic expectation that your cake will just be a carbon copy of the inspiration photo. You are essentially commissioning a piece of art. Edible art, but still art. And art is not the product of an assembly line, and getting something exactly the same is nearly an impossible task, especially if you're looking to have something quite special. Now, as far as the placement of the cake goes, that really is very key at the reception because you want to let it shine. You want to draw attention to it. The cake table, ideally, should be even more beautiful than the tables that people are eating at. So don't be afraid to make it center stage, create a fuss. That way, all your guests are just drawn to it, and that'll keep them occupied while you're busy taking photos after the ceremony. So the music. Let's just face right off the back that it is literally impossible to please everyone. The music people enjoy for background ambience and for dancing is entirely subjective. Your great Aunt Matilda is unlikely to appreciate the same songs as the teenagers of your family, and your favorite kind of music may not be conducive for a wedding. So let's wade into the waters of this controversy. Now, background music is generally at its best when it is instrumental. It sets the mood without interfering with conversations, and it gracefully covers over lulls in those conversations and maintains a comfortable atmosphere, which is what you want. Now, fortunately, instrumental music comes in a variety of genres, so don't feel restricted and think that you have to choose something that's classical, unless that suits your taste, in which case, go for it. Now, the issue of dancing music. It does seem that if you can persuade people to dance at all, they are more likely to do so when it is music that is familiar to them. I've often noticed that the more energetic styles of music are more likely to be danced to. Now, it may not be your favorite, but your reception is a party, and sometimes you've got to go with what works. Now, speaking of dancing, the first dance of the newly married couple is better when it's planned in advance. But if one or both of you is not fond of dancing, this may be a bit of a hurdle to overcome. If you dance over only rarely, there's nothing wrong with doing something simple. People are going to be just kind of oohing and awing about what a lovely, cute couple you make. They're not necessarily going to be analyzing the sophistication or lack thereof of your dance moves. Now, in my own case, my husband to date has danced with me exactly twice in his life. Twice. Yes, this is a bone of contention. Once was at a friend's wedding, and once was at our own. I suspect the third installment, if it's coming at all, will have to wait until our golden anniversary. And getting him to practice our dance ahead of time proved to be absolutely impossible. So work with the reality that you are confronted with. What are you in your intended actually willing to do? And you might as well start training yourself out of the expectation that your intended spouse is going to change to suit your preferences. It's not going to happen. And if you just accept that from the word go, it saves a lot of mental wear and tear. Now, side note. If my husband were to get struck by lightning and had the bad manners to die on me, then after I emerge from a suitable period of mourning, I have decided that I shall date gentlemen and only gentlemen who are willing to dance with me. I rather enjoy dancing, and it's rather irritating to know that my husband would prefer a root canal over having to dance. But moving on. The music at your reception itself will require some sort of DJing setup, whether your own, a friend's, or professionals, or you will need a live band. Definitely look up their references and see if YouTube has any examples of their work. You don't want to find yourself listening to things that grate on your nerves and having to plaster a smile on your face and just pretend that everything is fine. It won't end well, and the strain from your forced smiles will be visible in your pictures. Due diligence will pay off on the day, so bear it in mind. Now for the dreaded cleanup. It's rather dreary to think about having to tidy up after the excitement of your hand fasting and the reception, but it must be done. So it's best to go into this with a plan, because even if you did have a wedding at home and you can put it off, eventually it is going to have to get tidied up, and it's probably better to do that on the day rather than putting it off. And of course, if you hired a venue, you can't put it off. So as with all cleaning, it is about finding that union and balance between thoroughness and efficiency. Some venues will charge you extra if you leave the place in a mess, but at the same time, you don't want to give them a full spring cleaning. So it's best to have plenty of help, and this is at the stage where you will be very glad that you have maintained your relationships and not driven people completely crazy during the planning stages of your hand fasting. So rally your troops and then split into teams. Probably just two main teams will get it done, one to deal with the food and the other to deal with the decor. If by chance you do have leftover cake, you may find that some relatives and other guests are more than happy to take a slice home, so let them. If you are saving your top tier of your cake, and some bakers actually make a separate tier for you to freeze and save for your first anniversary, but if it's there on the day, make sure that it is boxed up and safe. One option to make the cleanup more speedy is to offer the centerpieces to your helpers as a thank you for their efforts. It also means it's one less thing to pack. Otherwise, use the containers you brought everything in, and don't be too fussy about how things are packed, unless you have breakable items, in which case do be careful. But let the focus be on getting the job done, not the manner in which it is accomplished. And of course, once the cleanup is done, offer profuse thanks to everyone who helped you. This is very much in order. Yes, your friends and family, they love you, and of course they were glad to be involved, and they would absolutely do this for you. But still, their help made your life much easier. It made the day go more smoothly, and it's just good luck and common sense to begin your married life with graciousness and gratitude. So I think that does it for the practicalities involved in having a hand fasting. Hopefully the videos talking about this process, at least in general terms, have been helpful to those who are in the midst of planning or who may one day find themselves planning a hand fasting. But most of all, I hope that my pagan brothers and sisters who are getting married have a wonderful and a memorable day that they can cherish and look back on with happiness. Now, next week's video on Thursday will be discussing living up to the vows, so I hope you'll be back for that. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments section below, or come see me on Discord at Blackbird's Brew. There is a link to join in the description box below, and I'd be very happy to hear from you. I think that's all for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.